Good morning, good afternoon, depending on when you're watching this. Thank you all for joining this here. We have a plan here to do a quick podcast here with our distinguished guest, Rowan Kern. Rowan and I go back many years across multiple engagements across multiple companies, and he's been kind enough to take the time to talk to us about a few topics. So Rowan, I think it'll be helpful for you to just get started and just tell the viewers a little bit about the research you're doing and what's top of mind for you, and a bit more about Forrester's plans to address the space as it's evolving.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a principal analyst at Forrester, and I sit on our business insights team. So I and my colleagues cover everything to do with data analytics, AI, and data science. And my specific research is around data science, AI platforms, as well as the cognitive search space. And I think it's been really interesting to cover this space over the past 3.5 years, particularly because there's been a very nice synergy between all of these areas. Through the generative AI space, we had the large language models already being used in a lot of search contexts at that point in time for neural and hybrid search. They were coming into AI platforms as well. And over the course of the past year and a half, we've also started to see, as everybody else did, the emergence of agentic AI systems. So really taking the language models and pushing them a step farther to have them actually coordinate and help get work done in enterprises. So a lot of my research right now is focused on what are the agentic systems that people are building today? What do they actually look like? What are the limitations? And not throwing cold water on dreams, but trying to realign us to the realities of what the world is like today, so that we can build a successful future for tomorrow. And I think just finished up a deep dive research wave into the cognitive search space, which was very interesting, and we're kicking off one into the AI platform space right now. And I think that both of these are really, demonstrating how interested enterprises are in these technologies, and how the buying conversation has really shifted quite a bit. So, in years past, when people asked me about search solutions and things like that, it would be kind of, more a back office or like an operational conversation. Now you have leaders coming and say, hey, I need a chat bot to do X, Y, and Z. And really what they're asking is, I need a search solution to go and get me information and provide it to me. But they are coming and asking these things, but it's framed in a different way. So it's very exciting right now because there's lots and lots of stuff, lots happening, but it's also challenging for, folks like yourself as a provider, as well as analysts like myself, because the way that people are expressing these needs, thinking about them, is starting to change a little bit.
Yeah, I think, as you said, people are going to evolve the way they even express a need right now in the space. So I think, maybe you could talk a little bit about the work you did on the recent wave on cognitive search platforms, because what that does is provides people a framework to think about it and use the right terminology about what is it that they expect to get out of these agentic systems. So can you speak a little bit more about the work that was done on that wave?
Yeah, so the wave itself, we cover various different vendors within it, but I'll talk a bit about the criteria, because I think that's really what is most important to enterprises, is really thinking about what is valuable to you. Because anybody can look at the wave and just say, okay, here are the leaders, here are the strong performers and contenders, but it's really about understanding what the capabilities are that you need. And so the ways that we encourage folks to really get deep into the necessary requirements for their knowledge, their data, their cognitive search solution, is to first focus on the data and connectors. So this has kind of been, I would say, one of the biggest areas of investment for the search vendors over the past 10, 15 years, really building in-depth, strongly typed connectors to various data sources. And that has driven a lot of the buyers' decisions in the space. Now, that continues to be a very important decision driver for enterprise buyers, but I think it's also important to recognize that now we have agentic interoperability centers starting to come to the fore. So it's not quite there yet today, but I think we can start to look at things like MCP and Ada as potential equivalents of like a USB-C universal charger, but a universal connector for enterprise data sources. So that's still a very important thing for enterprises to look at, and to look at whether the provider has the specific data source that you need, but it's also worth considering, okay, is there a way that we could potentially have a more generic MCP type connection to this stuff? And then, there's all the traditional, indexing and querying across traditional search, but one of the areas where we're seeing a lot of folks need more help and support, and it kind of came out of the wave as well, is in the retrieval augmented generation area, and not just in like building a RAG solution, but in building the best and most optimal RAG solution you can have for your company. So RAG is still like a relatively new discipline for a lot of organizations, and understanding the nuances of each of the different components is really beyond a lot of enterprises. And so they need to have platforms and providers that can help them with that. And specifically, some of the things that they really need to rely on their platforms for, because developing these skills on your own can be quite challenging, is understanding, for example, what your chunking and embedding strategy is. So that's how you're taking your, 500-page long policy document and breaking it into reasonable pieces so that a vector search can retrieve the right information rather than looking at the entire document itself, which will be a much less granular way of doing that. And then there's also the aspect of how you're actually doing the search and generation itself. Are you just doing a traditional keyword search, or are you doing a vector search, or are you trying to do what we consider to be the emerging gold standard around this, doing some type of hybrid search that involves lexical search, vector search, and then ideally some type of knowledge graph that is better understanding the user's intent as well as driving towards more relevant results. But again, this is something that is technically beyond a lot of companies, because you can go out and you can get a reciprocal re-ranking function and try to apply it to your data. We've seen organizations go out and do this themselves, but what rather inevitably ends up happening is they come back to me with questions and say, how do we actually do better re-ranking in our search solution? And that's the same type of thing that people would say in 2016, 2017 when they were trying to build their own search solutions. But we've now had people say, oh, well, it's easy with generative AI and with RAG. It is really not so easy. So they're still kind of struggling with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned even in your breakfast session, you talked about search being such a core component. But as you think about enterprise search, what we're seeing in the market is there is enterprise search, but the real ask is beyond just enterprise search. Right? The real ask is about trying to take a workflow and use agentic tools to actually automate the workflow and improve employee experience. What is your take? What are you seeing in the industry right now?
Yeah, so I think this is what brings enterprise search to kind of a inflection point isn't the right word. I would say it's almost like a teenager needing to discover who they are in the world and find themselves, because search has served like a very specific purpose with the enterprise for a number of years. But as you were just pointing to, now we are having folks who originally they were like, okay, I need the language model to just understand my business, and then they said, okay, I need a language model to ingest all the information in my business and give me an answer. And now it needs to take action within my business. And that means that the ability to provide information retrieval is not sufficient for that purpose. And so there's a real need to connect your information retrieval strategy and your information retrieval discipline with your actual enterprise execution. So what we're seeing is that, providers are either trying to offer the entire agentic platform themselves, or are taking a more specific role within this and providing more, not niche value, but more directed value. So I think one thing for a lot of the data vendors and a lot of the retrieval vendors is, there's a lot of framing that can be done around providing accurate and precise information, because that's where we see a lot of end users struggling with building effective agentic applications. Is how do I get the assurance that it is giving the right information, that is fresh, that comes from the right data sources and things of that nature. So I think that's where we're kind of seeing the shaping up of that happen at this point.
Yeah. And in terms of tools, right? So as I think about what you just described, there's going to be a lot of specific use cases, solutions that have to be built. But then there's also the underlying platform capability. As you look out to see what enterprises are looking to do, how much are you seeing a push to have the CIO or the IT standardize and double up the templates and give it to employees versus make it a free-for-all and have employees have full flexibility?
So I'm seeing both sides of this. I would say that right now, the tendency of enterprises is to want to provide a wide range of capabilities to their end users writ large. So we're seeing plenty of companies that are releasing, like a Copilot or a Gemini Enterprise or whatever it is to a large swath of their users and saying, hey, go figure out what you can do best with it. But that is, not necessarily going to get to the, the most significant level of business value. So we are also seeing enterprises who are saying, we are soliciting ideas from around the organization, but for all of our actual agentic use cases, we're being very directed and we're rolling it out very slowly. I think what's important for enterprises to look at with this is to try and take a balanced approach between these things in terms of enabling folks with, capabilities to understand what the art of the possible is, but not give everybody the ability to build and deploy agents, because we are already seeing folks experience essentially like, agent spaghetti code, for lack of a better term, where there's, at this point, it's, dozens and hundreds of agents that are not doing things that are useful. And in the future, that could turn into, thousands of agents that aren't doing things. So there's a real need to not, I think, pivot too hard into the citizen development aspect of agents. I think even if we look at what people are actually doing with these things, I've seen folks, end users, our clients, people at our own organization, build very effective information retrieval agents in a low code manner. But when you get to the level of like, complex process enablement and things like that, then it becomes very hard to describe in just natural language what you're trying to do with a system. So I think there's some real limitations to, business user vibe coded agentic AI, at least in the sort of midterm right now. And that is one of the many reasons that we're seeing, most of the agentic use cases be agentic RAG and not necessarily broad-based action-taking types of agents.
Yeah, and this comment you make, which leads to the topic of agentic proliferation. There's going to be a lot of agents being built. That leads to this discussion about governance, compliance, security, and control, and having visibility of all of your agents. So can you speak more to where do you see that? How are the vendors actually trying to come up with solutions for it? And what is the ask from the enterprise side so far?
Yeah, so the ask from the enterprise is to have one place where they can see all their agents, govern them, and understand like what they're doing and how they're doing it accurately. Are they getting what they're asking for? Not quite yet.
Okay.
So, there are essentially what an enterprise ideally wants at this point in time from the questions that I'm getting is, I want a single pane of glass where I can look at all the agents that I've built in this particular runtime, within my core platform itself, and then also see all of the third-party agents that my enterprise is also using within that single pane of glass, and not just see those agents and see what their response time is or whatever it is, but also see what data sources they connected to, understand the dependencies, and for the organizations that are actually really thinking about this in a deep and more mature way, they're starting to ask for things like versioning and the ability to do much more traditional source code management and stuff like that on their agents. But typically today, most of the agent lakes, agent control towers, whatever we want to call them, are looking mostly at first-party agents within that platform and then some visibility to third-party agents. And I think that the latter half of that comes from the fact that there aren't a ton of really good interconnect systems between different agent ecosystems to provide standard knowledge. So, if you are connecting between 3 or 4 different vendor ecosystems, there's not going to be a single definition of a level of confidence in an answer. And so how you actually rationalize those things as a IT leader, I think that's still yet to be determined. And frankly, at this point, we don't see too many organizations who have, thousands of agents across multiple different ecosystems they're trying to all manage together. It's still building up to that point, but the mature organizations are really thinking about how they're going to get their arms around this.
Yeah, it's going to be a complex problem that has to resolve itself fairly quickly. We'll switch to the topic of ROI, which is a big question on every CXO, every CEO, every C-suite's mind right now. And I think you articulated very nicely this morning about how there is automation, then augmentation, and then there's a journey. So how are enterprises that are actually succeeding at this, at production scale agentic solutions, thinking about ROI? And are they actually seeing it?
So yes, I'm definitely seeing organizations that are seeing ROI. I would say that the ones that are seeing it are the ones who have taken very deliberate approaches to what they're actually targeting and building out. So I think one thing that we've seen as a successful tactic is to really focus not just on use cases that are a problem for your organization, but use cases that have very clear metrics around them so you can see what the impact is. So I oftentimes talk about a lot of the service and support use cases, whether it's customer support or internal employee support, and those are oftentimes the areas that have the most effective agentic and agentish types of deployments, because it's very clear, okay, we have, X number of employee service calls that we get per day. And, let's say 85% of them are handled by humans today and 15% by our automated system. We want to get that down to 25% of them are handled by humans. That's a very clear metric, very clear target. And even if you don't hit it, you still have like a variable degree of measurement to say, okay, well, we got to 30%, and so that is not the ROI target, but it still results in some impact on the business. And I think what we've seen is that when you take more of these like generic agent capabilities or generic co-pilot type of capabilities, that's when you run into challenges on the ROI. Because if you are just giving your entire organization access to some type of enterprise-enabled chatbot with access to various enterprise data sources without a clear understanding of the processes that each of the employees go through that access that, then you're not going to be able to measure the impact. So you might be like, okay, we spent $500K on this and I have no clear outcome on this, except I have a bunch of managers saying my employees are more productive.
Yes.
So it's really important to tie this stuff into clear ROI measurements so that you can talk to the business about what the impact is, but also to look at use cases where it's not going to be built out in isolation. So I think this has been a challenge for some of the ROI use cases around AI, is not actually thinking about, okay, where is the data we need to access? Can we tie this into broader, enterprise knowledge sources? And also, is there something we can do after this first use case? So oftentimes we see folks, take a progression from a, relatively static automated process or human-driven process to, what we call the agentish approach, where you're kind of in between, human-driven and automated, where you have humans in the loop and, some type of checks and balances, and then finally getting to the more automated approach on the end. But you don't just go immediately from, the standard, like RPA approach to more to a fully agentic approach. You have to take steps along the way, and part of the steps along the way is learning what your risk appetite is and how to use the tools and stuff like that, which then builds in the next use case. But then additionally, if you're building on top of a data set which is relevant to other parts of the organization, then you can potentially take that first use case and use it to build out your second and third versions or second and third types of use cases. And that sort of portfolio-driven approach to AI strategy is something that we see some successful organizations doing, and honestly not enough orgs are taking this approach where they're saying, okay, use case A in customer service is really great, and it can actually lead to this really interesting use case in product development for use case B, now that we've understood this data.
Yeah. On that portfolio approach, I'm just curious, which I think we believe that's also the right approach to take. Quick, put runs on the board, show value, and then expand. Are you seeing enterprises do that by picking a single platform on which they unleash multiple use cases, or are they also saying, let me build one use case and then I'll go find best of breed for some other use cases?
Yeah, so I would say it's more like people are getting their platform capabilities and using them rather than building agents in multiple platforms per se. Now, I will caveat that with a little bit where I think there's enterprise productivity tools, like generic productivity tools, for all white collar workers. Those type of things are places where people are building agents that are separate from maybe some of the more functional stuff. So I do see, plenty of folks building stuff in like line of business applications and whatnot, but I wouldn't say most of those are like building agents per se. It's more just connecting up a couple of different prompts that they previously had. When it comes to actually, building agents, getting down to the code and whatnot, that tends to be within specific application development organizations, but that organization is whatever structure the enterprise has. I'm not seeing enterprises reorganize around agentic development as yet. It's really just using the existing structures that they have at this point in time. But I would say that one thing that we are seeing is that especially in like the line of business applications, the rate of change is the rate of new features, I guess I'll say, is very, very high. And so it's challenging for end users, but it's also challenging for the IT administrators who are allowing these new versions to come out to actually communicate to end users what the capabilities are. So even for folks who have, these kind of dedicated line of business applications, it can then be a challenge to actually understand what is the capability that is embedded in this new version compared to the last version.
Yeah. Speaking of the evolution, though, you mentioned multiple use cases after picking the first one and then sort of going across the enterprise. One other thing that I want to ask you about was as the level of maturity increases at an organization, and they go from just direct automation to more sophisticated augmentation, like you mentioned, and so they basically are going from simple deterministic workflows automation to reasoning-based architectures, right? Are you seeing that shift, and are you seeing that the solutions out there are able to keep up with that capability of being very deterministic workflow for automation to very reasoning-based, so they can tackle more complex workflows?
So yes, to a certain degree. So if we're talking about folks being able to use reasoning workflows to get a thing done at a some rate of success, I think we are seeing folks being very interested in that and being very experimental with that. But I think that there's a fair ways to go on the reliability count when it comes to agents. And I think that's, we talk a lot about like explainability, transparency, testing, validation, but I think what it really comes down to is reliability and like the concept of what does this use case need to have in terms of a success rate for me to consider this to be valid for my enterprise. And that aspect is something that enterprises still struggle quite a bit with. And that struggle either ends up in, a period of time of, aligning the application to the enterprise needs and, doing feedback and iterating on it, or it, ends up in folks like taking an application offline for a period of time and updating it, or it ends up in one of these use cases where people think that, the AI has failed completely because they haven't actually thought about the investment that needs to go into making this the most useful thing for us. But I think we are a not insignificant ways off from kind of full-blown agentic automation at enterprises. I think beyond just, the reliability, there's real challenges in scaling the testing of this stuff. I talk a lot about how, we can either throw a bunch of humans at this stuff, or we can have large language models and other foundation models drive the testing here. But both of those come with a tremendous trust tax. Like you would either pay the trust tax by paying all those humans money, or you pay the trust tax by having data scientists and others develop that LLM as a judge, and maybe it isn't as accurate as you want it to be. But both of these things mean that we can't build and test and release as many of these applications, and I think a lot of us would like to do at this point, especially at a time when we need to iterate to figure out what the state of the art actually is going to end up looking like.
Yeah. We'll get to a few of the pragmatic questions for people out there trying to make decisions in December. New Year's about to roll around. So if you are a line of business leader, C-suite executive that is trying to drive large-scale agentic automation across the enterprise, January 1, 2026, what are the top 5 or 10 most important capabilities that you should be looking to get out of any solution that you invest in?
So I think there's the data connectivity piece. So either I guess I'll put it another way. It's the data weight piece. So the data weight either needs to be in that platform that you are choosing, or you need to have a really robust and clearly defined set of data connectors to other platforms in order to bring in the context for how that agentic system is going to make decisions. I think that context piece is really important for organizations to embrace and understand. That context may be, it could be from a retrieval system, but it might also be a predictive scoring model that's on, your website or in an application that decides, okay, Rowan is in this cohort of users, so start him down this path. Then there's also the aspect of, evaluation, testing, and optimization. So this is not just, how do we test and evaluate this, but how do we actually, at the right stage, bring in experts to help us make sure that we're aligning this application with our needs. So previously, software development, you do your requirements phase with the business users, you'd get all their ideas, you'd go off and build prototypes, and then maybe you'd come back later on when it was getting to like the initial like UAT phase and stuff like that. Hopefully more iterative if you were more agile. But now we're getting to a phase where you have vibe coding tools can be very useful for helping to build front ends. So that can be a way of actually having a different communication tool to use with your business stakeholders to speed up this development process. And then really thinking about how you're shifting your testing and quality control resources around is important. And then additionally, understanding what your internal technological landscape is. So, every enterprise, especially the ones who might have grown by acquisition and whatnot, are going to have a bazillion and one tools across the organization. And it's going to make sense, to maintain a lot of those. It's going to not be possible to, entirely rationalize that tech stack. And I don't think it makes sense for most organizations to make some huge bet on a new vendor in the agentic space. I think it makes much more sense to say, what do we have available to us? What are all the agentic strategies with these vendors? And how can we grow our relationship with some of these, or how can we build our agentic ecosystem on top of them and bring in the content from the others? So I think it's important to make a strategic decision about where you're going to start building your agentic architectures, but recognize that you might have to shift that, like the control tower location to a different platform, depending upon how the vendor landscape evolves. But I think it's also important to, as you're looking at this landscape, to push vendors very, very hard to be open and interoperable because of these variegated landscapes that we deal with. If we want enterprise agents that are actually able to fully understand our context and are, the equivalent of having an actual human expert that understands everything across the org, so that they can be a true coworker, that means that you need to have open systems and open platforms. So just having, a bunch of enterprise tools that, don't have robust API or MCP or other types of connectors to each other can be very restrictive on that. So I think, making sure your data and connectors are in order, understanding what your technological landscape is internally, really thinking deliberately about the testing and quality control aspects of this, and then also thinking about kind of the continuous Kern and feeding and the next steps. So, January 1 of 2026, think about what are the most useful use cases we want to think about today for this, but also what use cases for the V2, V3, V4 does this lead us to, so that you can be communicating a more cohesive and holistic longer-term story to your leadership, rather than just saying, we need to do something about AI, let's do this today.
No, I think that's excellent. The last point you made about having the V1 through VN strategy requires you to also start thinking about something that is future-proof, right?
Yep.
So you cannot just pick something that works today. So Rowan, I know you published the Wave on Cognitive Search Platforms. Hopefully the viewers have had a chance to read it. What's the next most exciting piece of research you're working on, and when would it be coming out?
So hopefully in the next month or two, I'm currently working on a piece around it's essentially an architect's guide to agentic AI. So it's a report that is going to be really focusing for software developers and AI developers. How do you actually think about what the structure of an agentic application would look like? Like, do you need to think about task decomposition for your workflow? Do you need to think about different types of guardrails? How are you thinking about the latency being introduced by those guardrails within your system? So really a much more practical guide for our enterprise buyers about how you actually think about the structure of these things. That's, I think, that's going to be tremendously exciting to me. I'm very excited to talk to a lot of other practitioners in this space about what they're doing, because I think what I currently see is that every time I kind of go back to the market, most people are still very focused on information retrieval applications. So I'm hoping that we'll get some much more interesting information about the folks that are working with true agentic task support and automation there. And I would say the other really exciting piece of research is getting back into the AI platforms market space, which the last wave we published on was mid 2024, and even just in that 18-month time period, the landscape has very much changed. I think one thing, and I'll just say this very quickly, one thing we've seen there, to go back to the first thing we were talking about around the way that buyer communication has changed, we now see people talking about AI platforms with regards to everything from what would have traditionally been considered a search solution, or just a RAG system, all the way up to a complex platform that has machine learning, data science notebooks, data prep, and also RAG and application building. So the spectrum of things that enterprise buyers are thinking about when they're looking at AI platforms has gotten very wide. So that piece of research is I'm very excited about understanding more about how buyers are articulating, and then how to communicate that out to the rest of the market to help make this more cohesive. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for
Appreciate
having me.
you taking the time.
Great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.